Well, this is Dr. Stan back here at Radio Liberty, coming to you from the hills overlooking beautiful and picturesque Monterey Bay and bringing you the news behind the news, the story behind the story, hoping to convince you that reality is usually scoffed at, illusion is usually king. But in the battle for survival of Western civilization, it's going to be reality, not illusion or delusion, that's going to determine what the future will bring. And I need to remind you the views that are expressed here are not necessarily those of the owners, management, staff, sponsors, or supporters of the station you're listening to. They happen to be my views, and for the next 2 hours are going to be the views of Ted Gunderson, who was formerly the FBI agent in charge of the Los Angeles office of the Federal Bureau of Investigation before he retired some years ago. Before we go on, I do want to mention that this Saturday I'm going to be talking at a conference that's going to be held in Northern California, just outside of Santa Rosa, and it's going to be an all-day conference. We're going to actually give a couple of talks, and then there's going to be the Master of Ceremonies in the evening. It's put on by the Eagle Forum of California. It's got a lot of great speakers there. Jerome Corsi, Phyllis Schlafly, Michael Shaw will be there. And if you're interested in going, the number is 707-539-8393. That's 707-539-8393. And I can assure you it's going to be a great program. Well, with that as a background, right now let's get to Ted Gunderson, because, of course, I've known Ted for many years. He's one of those people who's given up his life in an effort to try to educate the American people about what's really going on in the world today. Ted, thanks very much for being with us.
Dr. Stan, thank you very much. And I don't feel like I've done a very good job based on what's happening and the general knowledge or no knowledge of the general public. But we have to keep plugging away. We have to keep working at it.
Well, our job is not to convince the whole population. Our job is to put the information out there, and I figure God's going to get the people who are supposed to listen, and those that don't listen, well, that's their problem. But our job is to put the truth out, and you've been doing that for a long time.
Doctor, I've been doing that since 1980, and I was in the FBI for some 27 years. And the time of my retirement, as you mentioned, I was in charge of FBI Los Angeles Division. I had over 700 personnel under my command. I had a $22.5 million budget. I had 16 offices that I was responsible for, with men in each office. And I was, I've always been, Dr. Stan, a flag waver, a Boy Scout, apple pie Chevrolet, hot dog, and that sort of thing, baseball. And I still am. Believe me, I am. I love my country. And I became involved, of course, I opened my own, right out of as soon as I retired, I was asked to coordinate security for the Pan American Games in San Juan, Puerto Rico, and I went to San Juan, Puerto Rico in the summer of '79. We didn't have one act of terrorism down there, although there were 4 terrorist groups that were active on the island. I had 5,500 athletes from North and South America there. It was a great experience. And then I came back to Westwood, California, which is near the campus of UCLA. I opened my own private investigation firm, security consulting and what have you. And my first major investigation. Oh, and before I go into that, I was a consultant for Governor Jerry Brown in 1982. I was with the California Narcotic Authority as a consultant there. And in 1977, I was honored as the Outstanding Law Enforcement Officer of America by the AFL-CIO Metal Trades Council. So I'm not some guy pushing a grocery cart looking for a recycling center, and that's created a problem for my adversaries and for the government. Do I hear music, Dr. Stan?
You do, but go right ahead. I'll get you off here. Don't you worry.
Okay. But so my first major investigation was the Dr. Jeffrey R. MacDonald case. It's spelled M-A-C-D-O-N-A-L-D.
And of course, that was the Green Beret, a military officer who was accused of killing his wife and put in prison. They put an innocent man in prison because, of course, they didn't want to admit that there was a satanic group out there. Government's done everything they could to cover up the satanic groups. We'll be back here in just a moment, right here at Radio Liberty. Well, Ted, go right ahead, because I think that Jeffrey MacDonald case is one of the most fascinating cases that I've ever heard of.
Definitely.
Go
We're
ahead.
not on the air right now, are we?
Here we are. We're on the air. We're not going to get any breaks this evening. We just talk right through the break.
Oh, okay. I thought that with the music we're going to have some commercials or what have you. But...
Well, we do. Then some people are hearing commercials and some people are hearing you talk. So you go right ahead.
Okay. Well, what happened, Dr. Stan, is I was asked to investigate the case. Dr. McDonald had been tried and convicted, sentenced to 3 consecutive life sentences for the murder of his wife and 2 children. His wife was pregnant, and his children were 2.5 and 5.5. They were brutally murdered, numerous stab wounds and what have you. And Dr. McDonald said that he was laying on the couch in the family room, or actually the living room. It was at Fort Bragg, North Carolina. He's a Green Beret doctor. And intruders came in, and there was a black man and 2 white males and a female who stood over him over the couch. He was laying on the couch. He'd been watching Johnny Carson. And the female, Helena Stokely, I learned later, was chanting, "Acid is groovy, kill the pigs, acid is groovy, kill the pigs." And he fought them off as best he could. He said, "What are you doing here?" And they said they'd come in, they were looking for drugs. And he heard his wife in the background saying, Jeff, why are they doing this to me?" And he heard his children say, "Daddy, Daddy, help me, help me." And he was frantic, and he felt a sharp pain to his left side and lost consciousness. And when he woke up, there was total silence in the house. And he went back. His wife had been stabbed like 28 times. The children had been stabbed and murdered. And it was just a horrible, horrible situation. He called the military police. They arrived at the scene. He was had passed out in the meantime. And the government claimed that he had staged this. And they said that the motive was because the child had wet the bed. The 5.5-year-old child had wet the bed, and he tried to go to bed, and it was wet, and he and his wife got in an argument. So he brutally murdered the whole family, which is absolutely unbelievable that they would accuse him of such an atrocious crime for a child wetting the bed. But that was what they claimed the motive was. So I began my investigation.
Now, who hired you to investigate the case?
It was a woman named Phyllis Hughes, who was the wife of a doctor in Huntington Beach, California. And Dr. McDonald, in the meantime, was out on bail, and he had come to California.
Hold that thought. We're going to be back here in just a moment now. Well, this is Dr. Stan, and Ted was telling the story of the McDonald murder. Jeffrey McDonald, a Green Beret physician, was laying on the couch one evening at home, and suddenly there are 3 people or 4 people hovering over him, and there's a woman and a couple of men, and then of course he hears his wife screaming in the background, and of course somebody stabs him, or I don't know whether they hit him or what they did, but he passed out, and when he woke up, he went in, his wife had been stabbed brutally numerous times. Both of his children were dead. And then, of course, when he called the police, they came up with this theory that he'd killed his wife because his child had wet the bed, and he was angry with the child. And it was totally contrived, as you'll hear later on. Of course, this was a satanic murder, as have been so many, whether it be the Manson murders, the David Berkovich murders. There are satanic cults here in America. And there's an organized effort on the part of the FBI and the military to play this part down, why they don't want the American people to know about it, and to know about the fact that the military is trying to work with the other dimension. They have actually units of the military that work very, regularly, trying to contact the power that comes from the supernatural dimension. I personally witnessed what a major general in the United States Army was able to do with a spoon, simply twirling it or making it into a couple of circles. I mean, I couldn't even budge the metal. He could do that because he had been working for years, part of our military, contacting the beings from the other dimension where the power is. Well, anyway, of course, they have to use Jeff McDonald as a scapegoat on this. They cannot let the American people know about the satanic coven. So pick up this story there.
Well, so what happened, Dr. Stan, is this woman, Helena Stokely, a young woman, she was in her early 20s, had admitted to a number of people that she was the person who stood over Dr. McDonald and said, "Acid is groovy, kill the pigs. Acid is groovy, kill the pigs." She kept telling people, but she would not know that she was in the house that night, and she was one of the murderers. And she actually told the prosecution this, and it's come out in the last several years. She told the prosecutor, Jim Blackburn, this, and he told her, "If you come forward with that story, we are going to try you for murder." So, of course, here I am.
I think it's important people know that there was a U.S. Marshal there, and within the last year and a half, that Marshal, after all these years, 25, 26 years later, his conscience got the best of him, and he came forward and he said, "I was there when the woman confessed to the prosecutor, who said, 'If you tell that story, we'll go after you for murder.'" And so, of course, she didn't dare tell the story. Go right ahead.
So, but she did go to the defensive team, and she tried to talk to them. They shunned her, basically. Bernard Siegel was the lawyer for Dr. McDonald, and she was mad. She walked out on them. So she went to both sides to try to tell her story, but she did make these admissions to various people. And so, of course, first thing I did is I had to target Helena Stokely. So I flew from California to North Carolina in January 1980. Excuse me, I'm 2000. 1980, I flew to North Carolina, and I knew I had to locate Helena Stokely, and I knew that she was a key to solving this case. And I worked with a retired police officer from Fayetteville named Prince Beasley. Now, Prince had used Helena as a drug informant. He said that Helena was the best informant he'd ever had. She put several hundred people in jail who were dealing drugs. And what actually happened is people would come from the outside of Fayetteville, out of North Carolina, into the base to try to deal drugs. And she was putting out the competition, is what she was doing, because Helena was part of a drug operation. And long story short, I ended up finally convincing Helena that she needed to tell her story to me, and she ended up on October 25, 1980, some 10 months after I entered the case, giving me a signed confession as to what happened. She had tried to give this confession to the authorities and to the defense team, but they didn't seem to want it. Nobody wanted to know what the truth was. And what happened, Dr. Stan, is that Helena and her group, this Satanic cult group, were part of a large-scale drug operation, and drugs were being flown in plastic bags in the body cavities of the dead GIs out of the Golden Triangle, out of Vietnam and Cambodia and Laos, into the various military bases in the United States. And the drugs that were being flown into Fort Bragg were being distributed by Helena's Satanic cult group up and down the East Coast. And that was the reason for the cover-up. Helena told me there were generals involved in this. There were enlisted personnel. There were police officers. There were 2 attorneys in Fayetteville who were involved in this large-scale drug operation. Now, of course, the authorities who were running the operation, the prosecution and so forth, didn't dare to come forward with this because they were obviously involved in a cover-up. They knew this, and it just never came out. I was the one that I finally was able to bring this information out to the public. Helena, I let Helena think that I had an informant on the inside that was giving me this information. It was good investigative technique. And I finally got Helena to come out to California and sat down with her, and I spent 10 days with her in California for the first series I had with her. And she said that it was her initiation into the Satanic cult group that night. And she, of course, had to be a part of the murders. So that was basically how I became involved in the issues that I'm involved in today and have been for the last 26, 27, 28 years. I went public with this information. I was on national TV. I was on national radio, numerous radio shows. And I preached from the rooftops that this was a large-scale drug operation, and it was satanic, a satanic cult, that the cult was distributing these drugs up and down the East Coast, and that was the reason for the cover-up. And, of course, I even said that there were 2 generals involved, which is what Alina told me. And
well, don't you think the CIA was involved in this, or at least some of the intelligence agencies?
Yes. Alina said that the Army was involved, but, of course, you and I know that the CIA has been involved in illegal drug operations for years. And although I have no direct knowledge the CIA was involved in this, I don't think there's any question about it that they were, right, in my opinion. And they were, by the way, this is documented, this drug-type operation, this technique, plastic bags full of drugs in the body cavity of dead GIs, was in a Time magazine article, January 1, 1973. So it is documented.
Of course, there was a book called Kiss the Boys Goodbye by Monica Jensen Stevenson, who had actually worked initially for CBS and put on some excellent programs there about the men we abandoned. And then she wrote this book, Kiss the Boys Goodbye. And, of course, it was her contention. The reason we abandoned those boys over there was because, of course, if they'd come home, many of them would have known about the CIA drug operations. We couldn't allow that. Her books were actually withdrawn from local stores. They were destroyed. She moved to Canada, got the copyright back. The book was republished up there, Kiss the Boys Goodbye. And then somebody accidentally shredded 5,000 copies of her book. Can you imagine that? Just accidentally shredded 5,000 copies of the book. We have second-hand copies, incidentally, here, which they tell the same story about how they simply gutted American soldiers coming home from Vietnam and stuffed their body cavities with drugs. And, of course, everybody in intelligence knows the CIA is involved. It's just that it's like the wife's always the last one to know. It's the American people are the last ones to know about the CIA involvement. But the book, Kiss the Boys Goodbye, secondhand copies available from Radio Liberty. You need to read it. You need to weep about what's gone on and about the 1,000 or more boys that we abandoned over there in Vietnam. And, of course, one of the major culprits was John McCain, who was a United States Senator, did everything he could to cover up the truth about the men we left behind. That's the story, title of the book. Go ahead, Ted.
Well, there's no question about it. There's a fellow named Red McDaniel,
right,
out of Washington, D.C., and he was shot down at POW. And his navigator, he was in a fighter pilot, and his navigator went down also and never came back. And Red swore that he would do everything he could to get his navigator back. And Red wrote all kinds. He was involved in furnishing information to people like Mike Blair with the American Free Press. Mike wrote a whole series of articles about the GIs that we left behind in Vietnam, and this is tragic. And I'm sure that by now most of them have passed on or are dead. But this is horrible. It's horrible. And McCain, how could you possibly vote for somebody like McCain, who did absolutely nothing to bring those boys back, even though he was in a position to do so? And Red McDaniel, I personally talked to Red on a number of occasions in the past, back in the 1980s, and he couldn't understand it. He went to the politicians, he went to the senators, he went to everybody he could to try to get the boys to come back, to have our government go over there and bring our boys back, and it just didn't work.
Of course, a lot of them were taken off to Moscow to be used for experimental purposes. Our government knew it. There's a book called Moscow Bound. In fact, we got an excellent book we carry called Betrayed by Dr. Joe Douglas. It goes into the background of all of this we're talking about, and not into the CIA and drugs, but into the men that were taken to Moscow to be experimented on. American soldiers abandoned by their government because they had a different agenda, because we have people working in Washington, D.C. who are basically and inherently evil. They're what I call the Brotherhood of Darkness. And they've done everything to cover up these satanic cults, the satanic movement throughout the world. And could you imagine them experimenting on your son or your father or your brother? Well, you go right ahead.
Well, Dr. Stan, this is one of many, many sad stories, and the Satanic movement is actually an international movement, and it ties into an organization known as the Illuminati. And I have a book called Pawns in the Game that fully explains this whole situation, the international movement to take over the world. And now they're talking about the North American Alliance, the Asian Alliance, the European Alliance.
Well, that, of course, was the book written by Commander Guy Carr. And although I never met him, I think he was a very honest, sincere individual. But nobody's ever read his last book. I see, certainly Guy Carr believed it was a Jewish conspiracy until he suddenly began to realize this was not a Jewish conspiracy. It was a satanic conspiracy. And he actually wrote his last book. Was incomplete, but his son completed it, and it's I've forgotten the exact title, but it goes into the fact that there is a worldwide satanic conspiracy by Commander Guy Carr, the third book that he wrote. And I think that you have to be in this for a long time before you begin to put all of the parts together. This is a worldwide satanic conspiracy, and it involves people at the highest levels of every government in the world. I think once you understand that, it makes so much more sense. But certainly the Pawns in the Game was an excellent book, but it only told part of the story. So go right ahead.
Well, and of course, after I went public with the Jeffrey McDonald case, people just came from all walks of life, from all over the United States, to me and started furnishing me background information, details, and data concerning the occult movement itself. These were people who were trying to get out of the movement. And so as a result, of course, I accumulated hundreds and hundreds of details and information, extensive information about the movement itself. And it's taken me a combination of a series, starting in 1980 up to the present time, to fully understand that this is an international conspiracy. It is taking place today. And it's called, as I said, and William Guy Carr, in the book that I make available to the public, is called Pawns in the Game. And, of course, the worldwide conspiracy involves 25 goals back in 1776 when the Rothschild family in England ordered a former Jesuit priest, Adam Weishaupt, to come up with the goals to take over the world. And on pages 26 and 27 of Pawns in the Game, it is William Guy Carr sets forth the 25 goals. And these goals involve control the press, which they most certainly do, we know that, and to corrupt the youth through sex and drugs, to elect our own people to office. If we can't elect our own people, to put our own agent tours in as advisors. And it's really a mind-boggling operation, and they are, as you said, they have infiltrated every level of society. People send me lists of of individuals who are involved in the Satanic movement, the leaders, and of course I have filed these away. And like, for example, I had a letter not too long ago. A woman in Illinois sent me a list of the leading cult members in that area. I had another one here.
Hold that thought, Ted. We'll be back here in just a moment here. That's Radio Liberty. Well, this is Dr. Stan, and Chris said Ted is well aware of this worldwide satanic movement, these cults, and he was just simply talking about their plan. And they've written it out. Of course, they've tried to attribute it to the Jews. It's not a Jewish conspiracy. It's a satanic conspiracy, and they're the Satanists within the Jewish who pretend to be Jews. And, of course, why? Why, of course, this is how you can get anti-Semitism going. You can lead people away from what this is really about. And of course, Ted simply points out that these people have infiltrated every aspect of our society. They certainly want to control the media. They want to corrupt our youth with sex and drugs. They've written all of these things out. It's all there in a written plan in a book that he offers. And then he points out that people from all over the country contact him with information. And he was recently mentioning some woman had contacted him with a list of the members of the cult in her section of the country. So pick the story up there, Ted.
Well, I have this information, and of course, as a result of the work that I have performed in exposing this on the radio shows such as yours, Dr. Stan, and I give lectures all over the country. In fact, I gave a lecture for the Prophecy Club back in last July, 16 cities in 20 days. I am doing the best I can to get the word out. There are numerous lectures of mine that are available on DVD, and I make them available for free, by the way, I might mention. And although my website right now, tedgunderson.com, is down, I do have a second website called 1-FREE-DVD.com. And those, if you go to that website, that's number 1-FREE-DVD.com, you'll see a list of over 400 DVDs that I'm giving away for shipping and handling. So I'm like you, Dr. Stan. I'm doing the best I can to get the word out.
And in fact, is that talk you gave at the Prophecy Club, did that go into the Jeffrey McDonald crime and so many of the other things?
Yes, I start out all my lectures with how I became involved in these issues. And it started with the McDonald case. I mean, before the McDonald case, I was totally ignorant about what was going on.
It comes as such a revelation when you suddenly realize what we're up against, and the fact that it seems that most people have no idea. Now, actually, you have the video interview with a woman who was there when Jeffrey McDonald's wife and children were killed. Don't you offer that?
Yes, I offer that. I offer her confession. It's Helena Stokely's confession. It's among the DVDs that I give away free.
Now, of course, the thing is that the authorities know this. The prosecutor knows this. The judges know this. And Jeffrey McDonald, 25, 26 years later, is still in prison?
Still in prison, Dr. Stan.
And an innocent man, and they know he's innocent, but let him out would mean that there really are satanic cults out there, and we couldn't let the American people understand that. They might begin to realize what this conspiracy is really all about. It's a satanic conspiracy to rule the world.
Well, now the latest information on the McDonald case, Dr. Stan.
Okay, where do we stand?
Well, 1997, now this is 11 years ago, the judge ordered DNA tests. And he said that only the prosecution could be present when they opened the evidence envelopes. Well, defense was not present, was not allowed to be present. And of the 15 evidence envelopes, 5 of them ended up being empty, according to the prosecution. But they still have done those DNA tests. Now, the DNA test is very favorable to Dr. McDonald. As a matter of fact, one of the tests, one of the pieces of evidence that the cult who's involved in covering this up did not destroy is a hair, including the root, from under the fingernail of one of the children. And that hair, with that root, does not match anybody in the McDonald family. Now, that was 11 years ago, and that evidence, the DNA evidence, is on the judge's desk today as we talk, and he has not had a hearing for a new trial.
Has this been there for 11 years, or how long has the judge had the information?
Well, the judge ordered the DNA test at the insistence of Dr. McDonald's defense attorneys in 1997, and the tests have been completed for several years now, and nothing's come of it. Nobody's had a hearing. We need to have a hearing and ask for a new trial.
Well, of course, the thing is, you have to understand, ladies and gentlemen, that there is an organized effort to cover up evidence of satanic cults, the satanic organizations, because they would lead, of course, if you were to follow them right to the various highest levels of our government. Why do you think we're fighting a no-win war in Iraq? We're not trying to win over there. If you doubt that, you get my December 2007 newsletter written by, it's basically the speech given by the general who was commanded the troops in Iraq for a year, Ricardo Sanchez. Read what he has to say. We're not allowed to win over there. We will never win the war because our boys are not allowed to. Well, this is Dr. Stan back here at Radio Liberty. You go right ahead, Ted.
Well, I mentioned a few moments ago the 25 goals to take over the world, and one of them is, I have documentation on one of them that's really solid, and that is to control the press. I have a copy of the Congressional VAC record. I think it's page 2949, but I'm not positive about the page number, for February the 9th, 1917, where Congressman Callaway from Texas stood on the congressional floor and announced that the J.P. Morgan interests had bought up 25 of America's leading newspapers and inserted their own editor in order to control the press. Now, what they did is they did a survey of 79 newspapers around the country, and they picked these 25 papers out as the ones that they would need to buy and control in order to control the information that's being fed to the American people. So look at this. That's almost 100 years ago. You can imagine how they've controlled the press today.
Well, of course, we used to carry a book by Professor Ben Bagdikian, who is a professor at the University of California in Berkeley. In fact, we will be interviewing him very, very soon. But Professor Bagdikian actually had been studying this very issue, who controls the American media, since 1983. And his latest book, I believe it was 2003 or 2004 or 2005, he said 5 mega corporations control 90 to 95% of the major media outlets in America. And but of course, you won't find that book in the local bookstores because the publisher refuses to sell it, to discount it sufficiently so that anybody can really afford to carry the book. They give you a 20% discount by the time you get through with paying the shipping and the other expenses. Why, of course, there's no profit at all. But we will eventually make that book available to our ministry, even if we have to put it out as a loss. People need to understand the media in America is controlled. And why don't you ever hear about this? Because they control the media, and they're not going to let the American people know the truth. Go right ahead.
Well, and it's of interest because I have a professor in Philadelphia that wants to write my biography, and he has approached the publishing industry, and they say that they don't have anything to do with that. So I'm blackballed. People don't want to know. People in the industry don't want to know about a fellow named Ted Gunderson. And if you go on the internet with me, Dr. Stan, you will find, I've been told this, I've never counted this. Somebody told me there's 183,000 references.
Hold that thought. We'll be back in just a moment here. Well, this is Dr. Stan, and Ted is just talking about how the media is controlled, and I certainly agree. Quoted the book by Professor Bagdikian, and professor up at UC has studied this since 1980, and he claims that 90 to 95% of the major media outlets are actually controlled by one of 5 mega corporations. Ted was mentioning that there was a professor who wanted to write a biography of Ted, but he approached the major media, and none of the major media would, of course, even consider actually publishing a biography of Ted Gunderson, because they don't want his information out. They don't want the American people to know about the satanic cult that dominates our society, and it's very, very important that you do understand it. In fact, right at this time, Ted, I'd like you to once again tell people how they can get at least to one of your websites that's up and open and operating, so they can get some of your material.
Well, my regular website is tedgunderson.com, and that is down. And I'm trying frantically to get it back up. I tried yesterday and today to get it up without any success. But the other website that I have is I'm giving away free DVDs, and it's the number 1 FREE DVD.com. Number 1 FREE DVD.com. I have over 400 DVDs that I give away, including most of my lectures. And my latest lecture, Dr. Stan, I had a tremendous response from. I just gave 3 lectures in Southern California, and people really liked it. And the lecture is called Infiltration of American Intelligence Agencies and Law Enforcement by the Illuminati. And I go step by step of the cases that I have personally handled in this lecture. This lecture is available through these one-free-dvd.com. What most people are doing is if you order 10 of them, shipping and handling is $17 and I think 83 cents. Most people are just sending me $20 because they don't make any money on this, as you can tell. So they're buying 10 at a time for roughly $20, and I urge you folks to go forward and check that out on the internet and get these some of these DVDs. It not only includes some of my DVDs, but other DVDs by and lectures by other individuals. But my latest lecture, I urge you folks to get it. And if you have an opportunity to get my lectures, make copies and get it to your friends, because this is what this is about: exposing the Illuminati, exposing the Satanic movement to the American people. This is not about Ted Gunderson making money or Dr. Stan making money. This is about trying to save our country. So my latest lecture is Infiltration of American Intelligence and Law Enforcement by the Illuminati.
How long is that talk?
That talk is roughly a little under 2 hours.
Okay, fine. Well, I think it's certainly I've known Ted. I will tell you, there's an organized effort to discredit Ted, and of course they do this by a whispering campaign. He's really a government plant. He's infiltrating the conservative movement. I don't believe that for 1 minute. Yeah, I'm sure you've heard the same thing, Ted. It must really hurt you to see how far they're going to try to destroy your reputation. And yet, Ted, I believe, is totally dedicated to getting the truth out.
Well, Dr. Stan, it's kind of interesting because I started to tell you this a few moments ago. I've been told that there's 183,000 references to me on the internet, which is kind of shocking. And 99% of them are favorable. There's 1% that are very unfavorable. And, of course, that is information that's been put out there by, to be honest with you, and I can document this, FBI informants. One guy in particular is a fellow named Stu Webb. I can document he's an FBI informant. I have him on a video, a DVD actually, where he says that he's working for the FBI and he's actually been given a symbol number. And when I was in the FBI for 27 plus years, we gave symbol numbers to our informants only. By giving them a symbol number, when you attribute information to them in your report, nobody knows who that information came from.
Well, I've talked to Stu Webb, and let's put it this way, I will never have him on my program again. And of course, I decided that long before you told me what you just told me. I mean, he's there actually to put out this information, to scare people to death. Of course, he does a great job of it, comes out with these sensational stories, and you never would want to give any credence to them. At least I would not.
Well, he has put out a lot of disinformation about me. He put out information, and it's on the internet now, where I was kicked out of the FBI for practicing satanic ceremonies in the federal building. And at my retirement party, Dr. Stan, I had former Governor Pat Brown. I had current governor at the time, Jerry Brown. I had Chief of Police Darrell Gates. I had Sherman Block, Sheriff of L.A. County. I had Tom Bradley, who was city council, who was mayor, by the way. I had movie stars. And I had Barry Goldwater sent some representatives. And so these are just absolutely not true stories. Also, that I've been involved. One of the latest ones I think that's really amusing is that I've been married 5 times, and I've only been married once, and lasted 24 years. We got divorced, and it was one of those things. 50% of the population is probably divorced today, but I'm married 5 times. Well, Stu Webb has a criminal record as long as your arm: assault, driving under the influence, drugs, and everything else, and I took him in. Here's what I've had people plan it on me. I mean, I've had so many people planted on me, I feel like the Garden of Eden, to be honest with you.
Well, of course, anybody who's effective, they will try to get close to them, and then, of course, they can manipulate them. They've done this with most of the conservative leaders in America, and I've personally witnessed over and over again, whether the infiltration of Pat Matriciana's organization or Michael Rupert's organization or Media Bypass, or I can think of, probably offhand, at least half a dozen of people I've been intimately associated with, where they've infiltrated, the FBI's infiltrated their organizations to destroy it.
Oh, absolutely. In addition to Stu Webb, I probably had 18 or 20 people planted on me. And Stu Webb came to me. He came to me once, and I thought he was a patriot. And he said, I need a place to stay for 3 or 4 days. And so I let him stay at my place. I had a 3-bedroom condominium in Las Vegas. And he ended up staying 7 months. And when he left, Dr. Stan, he stole me blind. He waited till I was in Los Angeles on a lecture, and he walked out of my apartment with case after case of my research, with 35 copies of Bryce Taylor's book, Thanks for the Memories, which are selling now for around $75 each. And I had those on consignment from Bryce, and it was unbelievable. And so, he just won. There's another one named Barbara Hartwell, who's from a CIA family. She's been bad-mouthing me.
Well, of course, I don't want to get into too many of the names because, of course, we don't want to leave ourselves open for lawsuits. But certainly, I know that there's certain people out there, a lot of people out there who I'm sure have infiltrated you, tried to befriend you, only to betray you. Can this really happen in America? Sure, certain people are targeted for destruction. I just think God's must have been looking after you, Ted, to keep you going all this time.
That's the understatement of the year, Dr. Stan. Right after I exposed the McDonald case to the American people, in fact, I appeared on CNN, I appeared on Discovery Channel, 48 Hours. In fact, the last show, I think, was Discovery Channel here about a year or so ago. But right after that, I learned that I was under investigation by the FBI. And I subsequently learned through the Freedom of Information Act that they actually had 3 investigations going on me. And I knew I had advanced information that the U.S. Attorney in Dallas, a fellow named Bill Alexander, planned to indict me on a Tuesday. And I heard about this about a week prior to that. And so I took 3 polygraph tests, and of course I passed. And I gave them to my attorney, Doug Mulder, who's an outstanding former district attorney there in Dallas. And I told Doug, I said, give these to the foreman of the grand jury and to Bill Alexander. And he did, and it prevented me from being indicted by the grand jury on a Tuesday. He got them to the grand jury on a Monday, as a matter of fact. But here I am. Here I'm living on a retirement check. And can you imagine the expense I would have had? I'd had to hire an attorney and all the time and effort put forth on that. So they were not successful there with me. And the next thing that happened is I had 3 occasions when gunmen were waiting for me. And people say, well, how do you know gunmen were waiting for me? Well, I'll tell you one of the experiences I had. There's one particular night, I had a place on 500 South Kelton in Los Angeles, California. I had an apartment there, opened onto the street door. My landlady came home. I did not go home that night. I was stayed at a friend's house. The landlady came home at 1:30 in the morning, and 2 men were sitting in a car across from my front door. One of them got out and came over to her and said to her, do you know where Ted Gunderson lives? Of course, I told the landlady that if anybody asks about me, you don't know me. She went up to the 2nd floor and watched these men in the car. They waited till 1:45 and drove off. Well, the next night after that, when I did come home, my landlady told me about this, and I made some phone calls, and I learned that I had a contract out on me. As a matter of fact, after I did some research and made some more phone calls, I learned I had 2 contracts out on me. One was by the Israeli Mafia, and the other one was by the Satanic cult out of Florida and Houston, Texas. There's a high concentration of Satanists in the Houston, Texas area, by the way.
Were they tied into this organization? What was it? I think
the what?
There was a worldwide satanic cult at that time, and I've forgotten the name of it. It was something like the Prospects or something of the sort. OTO,
Oro Templo Oriental.
Uh-huh.
Yes. As far as I know, they were. I was able to get the hits taken off of me.
How did you get them to withdraw the contract?
Beg your pardon?
How did you get them to withdraw the contract?
Well, in my business, investigative business, you have to know a lot of people in a lot of walks of life. And I had some contacts who were ex-cons, and as a matter of fact, there were three of them. Three people I knew. Two of them were ex-cons, and I went to them and I said, "What do I do?" And one of them said, "Well, I'll tell you what." He says, "I used to work for a fellow out of Los Angeles who was known as the cocaine king of the West Coast, and let's go talk to him." And so we made an appointment to go talk to him, and went in his apartment. It was actually his home, and we sat down in the parlor. We were met at the front door by an individual who I ended up learning was involved in contract killings himself, and that's another story. And we went in and sat down in the parlor, and a little dog came in. There were four of us there now, three of them and me, and smelled everybody and laid down at my feet and went to sleep. And this cocaine king of the West Coast came in the room, looked at the dog, looked at me, and said, "My dog likes you, I like you." And so he told the other three to leave the room. Now, at that particular time, there was a fellow named Robert Ferrante who had come out of his office several weeks prior to this, and about midnight, and a gunman stepped out of the bushes with a mask on and shot at him a number of times, hit him 5 times, and he lived. I was asked to investigate the murder and find out who put the hit on Robert Ferrante. And so I learned that his accountant had come out of the parking lot around 6 o'clock that same night, and there was a car with a man sitting in it with the trunk of the car to the building, and the man was just sitting there. And the night of the shooting, 6 hours later of the shooting, a car of that same description pulled out with the motor idling. Another car on the other side of the parking lot pulled out, and the gunman ran and jumped in the other car. And then, of course, this other car that I'm talking about that the accountant noticed took off. Now, what I did, Dr. Stan, is I put the accountant under hypnosis and brought in an artist, and we did an artist conception of the man in that car. And I learned through my contacts after I get the picture, he was known as Nick the Greek. And Nick the Greek was the fellow who opened the door of the house at the Cocaine King of the West Coast. He was there that night. And so I was kind of surprised, but I was with 3 other people, so I figured I'm okay. So long story short, Nick, the Cocaine King of the West Coast, had pulled out this artist conception and handed it to me. And well, his first question was, "How many children do you have?" Well, he was threatening me with my children if I didn't answer the right question. And then he pulled out this artist conception of this Nick the Greek fellow, who I later identified as Nick the Greek, by the way. And he said, "Who gave you, who did this?" And I told him, I said, "Look, I'm not going to tell you who did this. If you're going to do any harm to him, I'll take the heat." And he was kind of set back because I guess people aren't used to having people stand up to them. And he assured me then he would not do anything to the person that gave me the artist conception. So somehow or other, this fellow, the Cocaine King of the West Coast, got a hold of this artist conception, and he liked me, apparently probably because of the dog, I guess. And he said, "Let me be right. You have it on you?" I said, "Well, I've been told I have a hit on me." So he left the room and came back. He says, "You're right, you do have a hit on you." I took one of the hits off, but I couldn't take the other one off. And he was able to take the hit by the Israeli Mafia off. And I learned later that the hit by the Satanic cults, he couldn't do anything about that. So I went underground, Dr. Stan. I went to, I had a business, a flourishing business in Los Angeles. I had a staff of about 8 people, and I just couldn't keep the business going if I wasn't there personally. And I went to Dallas and lived in a condominium with a friend of mine secretly. And then F. Lee Bailey hired me, and I traveled with him for quite a while. And it took me about 18 months, and I was able to finally take the hit off that was put on me by the Satanic cult group. And they're very fortunate because in the meantime, I've become so well known that if anything happens to me now, it would establish credibility. It would be counterproductive to them, and it would give me credibility if anything happens to us. So I'm pretty well known now.
Somebody had just called in. There was something known as the Process Church of the Latter-day Judgment. That was certainly a worldwide a satanic cult here in the United States. Tied into, of course, to David Berkowitz, the son of Sam, tied into the Charles Manson. Do you know anything about the Process Church of the Latter-day Judgment?
Oh, yes, and very definitely. As a matter of fact, there's a book out by Maury Carey that was out back in late 1980s, and called The Ultimate Evil.
Right. In fact, I interviewed Maury Terry. Fascinating interview. Hey, well, our guest this evening has been Ted Gunderson. Ladies and gentlemen, this is not imaginary. It's real. The trouble is that these people are sending our boys over to fight and bleed and suffer and die in Afghanistan and Iraq, but they never tend to let them win. Well, Ted, we've got 3 minutes to wrap up this segment of the program. Then we've got a good deal more to do, so go right ahead. What message would you like to leave, at least with our listeners? A few of them are going to be leaving us at the end of this hour. To go right ahead.
Well, the message I want to leave is get my free DVDs, make copies, and get them out to your friends. I've done everything I can to expose these people. It's up to you to pick up the torch and carry it further than I can possibly carry it. So just say 1-FREE-DVD.com. It's right there. It's there. It's available to you for free, okay?
It's pretty hard to beat that. And certainly I can assure you that Ted's material is excellent. We need to get it out far and wide because Ted is involved in the same battle we are, and that is trying to expose the spiritual forces behind what's going on today. Okay, well, of course, they can get those DVDs. Are they free to actually copy them? And to get
I want everybody to copy them.
How many are you getting out? I mean,
I've got about 400 that I give out.
But I mean, how many people have actually come forward and been willing to get your material and help us get it out across America?
Well, quite a few people have ordered them. I have no way of knowing how many, but probably hundreds, several hundred. I have a conference this weekend in Southern California. Paymon conference. He's Freedom Law School. If you want to look that up on the internet, Freedom Law School conference. I'll be giving a lecture there, and that's basically I give them away at the conference. I don't give them away. I have an order blank, and they can order them and from there. But I want people. Yes, I want people to get copies and my copies and make copies and get it out.
And so, ladies and gentlemen, here's a wonderful opportunity for you to get this material and help us to get it out. It is so difficult for people to realize that there really are satanic cults right here in the United States that are being covered up and concealed by people at the highest levels of government. That doesn't mean the average government official has any idea what this is all about. But there is a small group that do, and they're usually in key positions, and some of them are even working for the CIA. Some of them are working for the FBI. In fact, there's an FBI agent. His job is, anytime anybody's talking about satanic cults, to go out and say there are no satanic cults. There's nothing to worry about. It's all hysteria. Have you run into that fellow?
Oh, yes. Ken Lanning was notorious for that back in the 80s and the 90s. Ken Lanning was with the Behavioral Science Unit.
Hold that. We'll be right back in just a moment. Well, this is Dr. Stan, and certainly our guest this evening has been Ted Gunderson, and I hope you'll take him up on his offer to get his free DVDs and get the information out. Now, Ted had mentioned a book called The Ultimate Evil by Maury Torrey. The book is out of print, although you may be able to get it on Amazon. I've interviewed Maury Torrey, fascinating interview, but much of his material now is in a book we are carrying called Satanic Crimes. Goes into the Bilderbergers, and there's a group of powerful fabulously powerful and wealthy international leaders and the people there from the royalty of Europe. But you have to understand that within the so-called black nobility of Europe, these same satanic cults exist. So the book, the Satanic Crimes, and then of course we have a 4-tape set that goes right along with that called Satanic Crimes, and you can get it either in tapes or in CDs. You need to get the information. You need to begin to put it together. We actually have a DVD on the Bilderbergers put out by our good friend Alex Jones called The End Game. It goes into their plan to kill off most of the world's population. To kill off most of the world's population. In fact, Alex got a lot of his material off of our website, off of our writings, and he acknowledges that. And I'm flattered that he would think that my material was worthwhile reproducing, but you'll see a lot of it there in his DVD, The Endgame on Population Control and the Plan for Mass Extermination. And people say that's crazy talk. Well, of course, you need to get his DVD. You need to get my 4-tape set on the Bilderbergers, and then the 3 books we have on the Bilderbergers by Daniel Estulin, the Bilderberger Diary by James Tucker, and then Satanic Crimes by William H. Kennedy. And they're all there. They will all tell you about the Bilderbergers. These are not imaginary organizations. There are really people out there who are deeply involved in Satanism. We have a book called Diary of a Devil Hunter. A man who is involved in Satanism used to go around the country lecturing to police forces and in various parts of the country. And then this gentleman would come from the FBI to undermine what the author had said. Why? Because they cannot let you know that it is really true, that there is another dimension there, and these Satanists are in touch with the other dimension. If you've not yet gotten our DVDs, pardon me, I should say our 4-tape or 4-CD set on the supernatural, you need to get it and, of course, listen to the interviews with Johanna Michelson, who is a medium, and then read her book, The Beautiful Side of Evil. The Beautiful Side of Evil. You need, of course, to get the book Hostage to the Devil, and, of course, the 4-tape set that goes with that, The Wisdom of Malachi Martin, because Father Malachi wrote the book Hostage to the Devil, goes into 5 exorcisms. And I will promise you, after you've read that book, you'll never look at the world through the same eyes again. We're involved in a spiritual battle and a supernatural battle against the forces of darkness in this world. If you haven't read my book, Brotherhood of Darkness, shame on you. You need to get it. You need to read it. You need to study it. You can watch it on my website called Brotherhood of Darkness. There's a DVD up there. Of course, if you'd like to get the DVDs or get large numbers of them, we can recommend that to you. And then, of course, we hope that you'll get my talk on the forbidden secret, because there is a secret that's been passed down for 5,000 years through the secret societies and the sages of the secret societies and the adepts of the secret societies. And it was a secret that is never to be known until this time in history. And then, of course, we have a wonderfully, very professionally a set of DVDs. One is called The Secret Mystery of America's Beginnings. And the second one, I recommend even more strongly, if you're only going to get one, get the second one, which is Riddles in Stone, The Secret History of the architecture of our nation's capital. Riddles in Stone, The Secret Architecture of Our Nation's Capital. Our number 1-800-544-8927. 1-800-544-8927. And then, of course, we ask you to pray for America, to pray for revival, to pray for Radio Liberty, for our provision and protection. And we'll be right back